Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about 5 players that you don't want at your Adventurers League table. Now, if you DM long enough, you are going to run into at least one of these, probably almost all of these types of players. Now, this will be controversial because a lot of people believe that we should just let players do whatever they want at the table, but in Adventurers League, we do have a code of conduct that people are required to play by, and that includes dungeon masters. So the minute people breach that code of conduct, and honestly the code of conduct is all common sense, no harassment, no sexual harassment, no threatening of players, things like that. You're going to see all of these things happen at one point or another. But let's go ahead and discuss the 5 players and explain why you can't have them at a table, and in some cases why you have to tell them they're not welcome at your table. The first player is the rules lawyer. We all run into these all the time. The rules lawyer is the type of player who, whether it's the dungeon master or another player at the table, the minute they do something, the rules lawyer is arguing that they can't do that. They're flipping the pages in the book and arguing rulings that you make. Now, the problem with the rules lawyer is a lot of the time they waste half of your time that you're playing arguing over rules and being petty. The reality is, once the dungeon master has made a ruling, that's the end of the story. Also, if they're telling another player what they can or can't do, and the dungeon master is not doing that, it's not their place. So if you have a rules lawyer at the table, you have to take them aside and say, look, my rulings are final, and it's not your place to correct another player. And if they continue, explain to them that they are disrupting play, and you may have to ask them to play at another table or to leave if another dungeon master is not willing to deal with that player. Rules lawyers are probably one of the oldest living problems in D&D, and they're also one of the most common. You will always find these players playing, and usually a quick conversation with them will take care of it. Honestly, if you're a rules lawyer and you're that awesome at knowing the game and all the rules, sit behind the screen and dungeon master, because then you can explain the rules to people. But as a player, it's not your place. So those are players that you need to correct, or if they just refuse and continually keep the game from progressing because they're always arguing at the table, you may have to ask them to leave. It's not the best thing or the nicest thing to do, but you have to think of everyone else at the table. I mean, they're getting just as aggravated as you are by their method of play. Second type of player is the overly aggressive player. Now, the overly aggressive player comes in 2 types. The first type can be corrected probably with a warning. And that's the player that when they don't get their way, their character is constantly threatening other players in the party. You can't be doing that. You can't be threatening, I'm going to kill your character if you don't do what I want or if I don't get my way. You need to take these players aside and tell them, cut it out, or you're not going to be playing anymore. And usually a single warning will take care of it and they'll correct the behavior. Now, the second type is the kind that the minute the behavior starts, they have to go. There are no warnings or anything else. And it's the type of player that when they don't get their way, they actually threaten another player at the table, or they threaten the dungeon master. The minute threats come into play, they have to be removed. And if it's someone who, for some reason, you think is unstable, and the minute you say get up and leave, they're just going to flip out and attack somebody, you go to the store and you tell them exactly what's happening and let them deal with it. Honestly, it's just one of those things. That is one of the most extreme violations in Adventurers League, and you can't allow that to happen. It's an automatic ejection. You don't have to, and you cannot allow these players at a table. I mean, if you let these people sit there, players are going to leave the store. Then they're not going to come back, and it's just going to end up where all they say is they're allowing a violent player to stay at the store. Stay away from there. You don't want that. You don't want them around yourself. You don't want them around your other players. You have to eject them. And if, like I said, if you're worried, you go to the store. If they have to, they'll call the authorities. But these are players that cannot be allowed at a table, and they have no place at a table. So don't allow the overly aggressive player who is actually making physical threats to somebody or being aggressive in any matter towards other people to remain at the table or in the store. Now, the third player that you definitely don't want at the table is the Edgelord. The Edgelord's the kind of player that will say things to get a reaction out of people. You know, they will say and do things to act cooler than they are, to act tougher than they are, to just act psychotic sometimes. Usually it's the teenager trying to act cool at the table. Sometimes it's the older player who still is not socially adjusted in life and they play crazily. A good example I saw online was a dungeon master that had a player show up and they had written an extensive background. And when they sat down, they expected everybody to sit there and listen while they read this background, which took approximately an hour to read. Now, they should have cut it off within the first minute because the way she opened the background was she was sexually abused and raped as a child. This is a point where you just say, you know what, we don't need to listen to this. You take them aside and say, you know, where are you going to go with this as a character? How do you intend to play it? This character intended to play it that she was an absolute sadomasochist. She got off on torturing people. You know, she had this weird relationship with an imaginary brother in the game where they were, you know, having intercourse that doesn't belong at the table. So you need to tell them, all right, my suggestion is make a new character. None of that background is acceptable in any way, and none of that type of play is acceptable in any way. And if you can't do that, you're not welcome at the table. You know, you've got to shut the edgelords down because, again, this is a situation where players will leave your table and never come back. And it's not going to just reflect poorly on you as a DM, it's going to reflect poorly on the store because they're going to let people know that you are allowing this kind of play to happen and the store is not doing anything about it. Now, the store probably doesn't know anything about it because, you know, the people running the store are off doing their own thing. You're probably at a table far away from the counter where they're working. They don't see it happening. You are their eyes and ears, and honestly, you're there to keep this kind of crap from going on. So if you're a dungeon master, you know, you're there to protect your table and the interests of the store that you're representing when you're running. Make sure that you don't let this happen. You know, it's just not acceptable. It violates the terms of play that Wizards has set down, and they say you've got to get rid of these players. So don't be afraid to confront them and tell them no. Now, the fourth type of player is the sexual role player. Oh my God, we've all run into the sexual role player before. It's, you know, it's generally, I'm going to say it, it's generally a guy who's going to role play a female, and they're going to go into detail about their character's ample breasts, how they're dressed seductively, they're constantly trying to seduce somebody, or being an exhibitionist and describing in great detail their body parts and what they're exposing. Shut this stuff down. The other type of sexual role player is the one who's always constantly trying to seduce the other party members at the table where the characters are opposite sex, sometimes even same sex. None of this should be happening at the table. I mean, it is open play, public is in there, kids are in there. None of this should happen. Honestly, in my private games, I don't allow this to happen. If somebody wants to role play seduction, I shut it down. You know, I don't want to hear it, and most of the players at the table don't want to. I don't know what gets this character, this type of player going on this kind of character and why they do it, but you have to shut it down. Again, this is another violation of the terms that we have and the code of conduct, so you don't let it happen. You have the option because this is something you can probably take somebody aside, but sometimes you're going to run into a player where you try to cut them off and they'll just talk over you, or if a character or player sitting there saying they're not comfortable, they'll just keep talking and talk over them. That's the point where you have to shut them down. I'd even read a story where a guy thought because he had paid to play at a public event that he could do that. Truth of the matter is the other 5 players had paid too, and you're under a code of conduct. Wizard says you don't have to allow this guy to be there whether they paid or not. Kick them out. Don't let it continue. So if they're going to be aggressive and continue to do it and think it's their right to do it because it's an open play event, or worse yet, because they paid to play at a public play event at a convention or something, it's your right and your responsibility as a DM to cut them off shut them down, and if they won't stop, to kick them out. And it doesn't matter if you have to call authorities to take them out, whether it's the con authorities, the police, or whatever. Kick them out. Don't allow it to happen. And I know people don't want to hear that, but you have to kick them out. The fifth and last player is the IRL, or in real life pervert. If you're lucky, you're never going to run into these. I personally had to deal with one of these where it was a middle-aged man making inappropriate comments to a female player at the table, directed directly at her, not at her character. And this, I mean, it's sexual harassment. Shut it down. You can't have these players at the table. You don't want them at the table. I mean, it's a problem if you as a DM want them at the table. Everybody's violating the code of conduct at that point. But if you have the in real life pervert making sexual comments at a female, or I'm not even going to say a female. You could have a female making one to a male. Whatever they're doing, you shut it down because it's not appropriate in open play. If it's a private game at your home and you're fine with that because it's a pair of partners that are playing together, go for it. But if it's a pair of partners doing this in open play at a table, shut it down. It's a violation of the code of conduct. You can't allow players to make other people uncomfortable, and it's just not appropriate in an open game. So, I mean, this is another one where you have to shut it down immediately. You can give them a warning if it's egregious enough where it's just automatically sexual harassment. It's not two players that come together and saying stuff that are inappropriate. If it's somebody doing something to a player that they've just met at this table and they're pulling this stuff, kick them out. Don't let them continue. And you know, you can't go under the rules. Let people do what they want because they can't do what they want. And I'm not going to read the code of conduct. Sit down, go to Wizards, look at the code of conduct. When you download the little DM download and the players download, it has the code of conduct on both. Read it. It's very clear on what you don't have to put up with and what can't be done at the table. And it is fine for you to ask these players to leave because they're disruptive. Disruptive play is not allowed in Adventurers League. All right, that's it for today. I'm sure this will be a controversial video. People are going to disagree that some of these players should be removed. But if it comes to if it comes to a point where people are disrupting play, they are taking up too much time, they're preventing people from enjoying their gameplay, and you start noticing people not coming back to your table while this player is there, you have to shut them down. Each one of these players individually can be disruptive and have a negative impact on your table and prevent people from coming back. And honestly, I've said it in other videos, if ruining the fun of the disruptive player means you have 5 or 6 other players at the table that enjoy themselves because you've asked this guy to leave, that is the only decision that you can make. You have to make sure that the majority of your players at the table are happy and coming back. I mean, that is your obligation as a DM. You're there to provide enjoyment to the majority of the table. If you have one disruptive player, you don't have to play to them. You don't have to allow them to do whatever they want. Just make them either stop, or if it's an egregious violation, these are all common sense. If they're doing something bad that, you know, there's no turning back, or, oh, I'm saying I'm sorry to the table, make them leave. You don't have to allow disruptive players to play at your table. You simply don't. It doesn't matter if it's a convention that's a paid event or an open play event that's free. Dungeon Masters don't have to allow this to happen. And here's the thing. As a Dungeon Master, I see a lot of DMs that are afraid to confront people like that. Go to your coordinator. I mean, if it happens, say, hold on a second, I'll be right back. You go and talk to the coordinator at the store. If you don't have a coordinator, you just have the owner, you go and talk to them. Tell them exactly what's happening. Lay out that people are going to leave or you're going to quit because you're not going to have a player like that at the table. And they will do the right thing in 99.9% of the time because they don't want the reputation of the store to be harmed by allowing bad players to do whatever they want and good players to complain and put on Yelp and other places that this is a crap store to play at because they let anybody do what they want. So it's your responsibility to maintain the conduct at your table. If you're afraid to do it, go to the coordinator or the store owner or the management and they'll take care of it for you. But you can't let this kind of stuff happen. But that's it for today. Be sure to put your comments down below, whether you agree, disagree. If you've had similar things happen, I'd be interested to hear what kind of crazy stuff you've had happen. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Thanks again. Have a great day.